Welcome to another tutorial. If you didn't see this video that I put on YouTube, this is kind of what we're going to be covering over the next month or maybe 2 months. We'll take a look at a couple of these different scenes. We'll start off with modeling the chocolate and then take a look at the textures of the chocolate. I pretty much left everything the same throughout, and sometimes I had to tweak the subsurface, but the way that I did this project was I modeled the chocolate, I did all the textures, and then I kind of left it as much as I could to what I originally did so that I could just focus on lighting and I didn't have to keep tweaking lighting and textures. And the goal of that was to try and keep something fairly consistent throughout. Something else I did was I recorded myself, as you can see here, actually measuring the chocolate. So I have the exact dimensions. So let's jump into Houdini and let's start creating this. So I'm going to call this chocolate bar. And I'm going to create a box. And I know that the dimensions of this were something like 13.42 and 0.6 and 5.846. All right, so that is kind of the size of my chocolate bar, and what I can do here is just do a match size and put this on the floor just so that we have that. And this is nice, just now I have kind of like a reference, so I can make these blue. I usually do that if I'm like using this as a reference. And now everything else I can kind of constrain to this. So something else I can do is go into this top view, and because I had the chocolate bar, I could take a photo that was kind of perfectly on top, and now I can just resize this. Let me just get one side and then I can match it the other side. So that's roughly right. So then I can copy this and paste this and hit W to go into wireframe mode and turn that off. So you can see that this is relatively close to the size of my box. And so this is kind of like the size, and you can see all these little details and stuff. I didn't always achieve this. I did try and get some of these details in there, but it's very tricky. And that's why I used like the fingerprint texture to try and like mimic some of this. I really wanted to try and get these little holes in here, which give it nice imperfection, but it was a bit of a struggle with when I was fracturing and all that to try and get all that in there. But it was a fun process anyway. So let's just turn down the brightness of this. Kind of goes into the background there. So now what I need to do is just model these little blocks. So we can start here, and I'm just going to create another box, and let's just shrink this down. It'd be nice if I could see it. Oh, there it is there. And get it. I'm going to go for the outside diameter here, and this can be a little bit rough. Let's just get this bigger. So maybe a value of 261. That looks pretty good. And a nice short value, and then 1.9. So it's just going to the outside. And if I take a look at these together now, you can see that that is underneath there. So that doesn't help me. What I need to do now is just make this inside one, and I also need to taper this box. And so an easy way to do that is just to use a transform node, and I'm going to just select this top polygon here, and what I actually need to do is make sure that I'm centered. So I've got this legacy preset, which is this center point, and this is just setting these values here. So now whatever point I select here, which was number 2 I think, it's now centering my handle on that. So I can now just drop this down ever so slightly, and then maybe this one needs to go down a touch more. Yeah, so something like that. You can see that's a pretty good estimation of that. Now let's just copy this box, and we can just shrink this down to be this inside shape. And I actually don't want to off center it. I want this to be centered with this, which it is. So I'll kind of keep that and just assume that everything else is not super centered. And then we can do a Boolean. And what I need to do here is just transform this one so that it goes up. So now I'm getting this hole here. I think a value of 2 is good. For now, we'll keep that. That looks pretty accurate. I don't know if I actually measured that hole. Maybe I did. but I used a value of around 0.2. What you can do is, if you want to get like really specific, is you can use a match size, and then we're going to match size this to this. So if we set this to the min and this to the max, it'll place it on top of this piece, and then instead of this going up, we can actually make this go minus. So now we have it exactly where it needs to go. So we'll do that. And now we need 3 of these. So what I'll do is I'll transform this and then just move this to be over here. Then I can do a copy transform. And now I can just say I need 3 of them and just move them down. So now I have 3 of them that are kind of aligned. And I think something like this is pretty cool. And now I need 3 more of these. So instead of using a copy transform, I'm just going to actually transform them. It just gives me a little bit easier manual control. So I have one there, and then this one will basically be the opposite of this. So now if I merge all 3 of these, now I have these 3 chocolates, which is cool. So now we can kind of tackle this big middle one. And what I want to do is basically take this whole setup and just change these shapes. So I'll move this one over here. Just make it bigger so that it aligns with the edges of this. And I want this to be pretty accurate. Doesn't have to be 100%, but you'll see when we mesh all this, otherwise you get these like kind of bumps, and we could get the bounding box of this and match it exactly right, but for now I won't do that, but we could. I'll pipe that in there. So now we have this, and we can shrink this down. Let's see, we want to shrink that, and that looks good. How big is this one? 0.5. Okay, so that's not working out for me. Let's just check this. So this is being too extreme. Like that looks good. And then these ones can go in a bit more. Okay, so something like that looks cool. And then that's on top. And then it starts to work maybe. Oh, this I'm going all the way in. I don't need to do that. I want to get it to the outside here. So I'm confusing myself. So that needs to go to this outside lip, and this one too. Like so. And then this can go over here like that. Okay, so let's merge these and jump out of wireframe mode, and that is looking pretty good. So we can now just transform this like we did before. So I'll move that back up. Jump into this view, transform this one over, and then merge these two. All right, so we are starting to get a chocolate bar. So you can see here that this kind of needs to be centered a bit more, and maybe we can just transform this whole one just a little bit over more, and then these ones can come in a bit more. And now it's just playing and just kind of finessing the general look of this. And in general, we want to try and get this as good as possible, because as I said, I used the same thing throughout. And so if like this part doesn't look so good, then it starts to kind of trickle down into the rest of the animation. So I'm going to just spend a little bit of time getting this to look fairly cool. Okay, I think that is pretty good. If we jump into our normal view, you can see the spacing is fairly similar. Maybe not exactly, like this one's a little bit smaller, so I can maybe just move this one out a little bit. Yeah, now the spacing looks pretty equal, and that looks quite cool. Now we have this chocolate bar, which is like the base. We can use this as the base, and so we need to put everything else on top of that. So we'll use a match size again. Want to match size, not match axis, match size again, and we will use this, and we want to place this on the top. And then if we merge these, don't need that merge anymore. So now we have the bottom with the top. And that's right, but what we want to do is I'm going to use a VDB from polygons, and I'm actually going to do this separately. So I'm not going to merge them, but they're in the right place now. That's what I wanted to check. And we'll set this at 0.009. That's what I ended up using. It's pretty dense. So for now, let's just go with 2, just so that it's easier to iterate. And what I'm going to do is just copy this parameter and then paste relative reference in all the other ones. So I can just change it once later on. So we can do a VDB combine, and now we're going to just combine these two. And we want to union them. And then if we do a VDB smooth SDF, and then a VDB convert into polygons, you can see now we have a chocolate bar. Now, obviously, this is a little bit rounded because we need to up this. So if we go to 0.9, you see it takes a little while, but you can see now we get this really nice kind of sharp, crisp corners, but it's not so sharp that it doesn't look chocolatey. It looks pretty cool and rounded. And maybe this sizing is a bit weird, but it's fine for now. You can tweak and play with that. So let's just drop this down again so it's not so slow. Now we need to get the letters in here. And the way that I did this was I found the logos online, and I ended up just tracing them in Illustrator. And then I can just grab them with OD tools, this vector import. So you can see I've got the Mr. Beast and the Feastables. So then I can just split them. So I just split these two. So let's just use a match size just to get it in the right place. We'll just set it on min. So now they're in the right place. Now we need to transform it because now it's facing the wrong direction. If you remember, our chocolate bar is facing up. So we can just set this to be, I think it's -90. Yep, that looks good. And then we can also rotate it this way. And we need to scale it up. So let's just jump into this. And that was actually pretty close. Something like that looks pretty good. And let's do a poly extrude. Now we need to extrude this up. And the exact size doesn't really matter because what we'll do is we'll transform this, and we want this to kind of intersect our geometry so that we can use this as like a Boolean. So if we go to the side view, it's going to Boolean into this with the VDB. So we'll go something like that. And if we want a VDB into just the tops, we don't want a VDB into everything. So we can do a VDB combine, VDB here. So I'm just dragging, alt dragging to copy these. And now we don't union, we want the difference. And you can see now we get that cutout. So we can now do the same thing on the other side. I'll actually just copy all this over. But we want to jump to the top view and just move Feastables down to Feastables. And you can see this needs to scale up a bit. And you can see the logo is not exactly the right logo, but you can't really tell. And you can probably scale it in that. I've been told before that you must never scale logos, but this actually looks a little bit more like that. So I'm going to do that, break all the rules, and then do this. And then we can take this and pop this into here and then take a look at the outcome. And that's looking pretty good. Now let's jump this up to 0.9. All right, so now we have a pretty good looking chocolate bar, and that did not take long at all. The mesh is pretty dense. So we are at 3 million polygons, which is not great. So what I'm going to do now is just file cache this so that I have it. and I do not need this to be time. And what I'm going to say is just chocolate bar VDB, save to disk. So when I open this file, it doesn't have to recalculate all those steps. So if you have a crash or something, it gets very frustrating to have to redo this over and over again. So now what I want to do is do a poly reduce. So this is going to be my working geometry. So I want to keep enough of this that I can see all the details, but I want it to be as low res as possible so that it's easy to iterate. So depending on what simulation I'm doing, I don't need a lot of polygons. Now, obviously, if we're doing something like Vellum, then I need to create a remeshed version with equal triangles. But in the case of like when I'm fracturing or when I'm doing fluids and I just need a collider, I just need something like super basic that has the shape and form. And so this is where this poly reduce really comes into play. So you can see nothing actually changed in terms of the look. So this is the before and this is the after. But if you take a look at the mesh, you can see we went from 3.something million, 3.1 million to 400,000. And so that's a pretty drastic change for nothing else changing. You can see that there's a lot less triangles and it's just maintaining kind of the edges and stuff. And we could probably even go lower, but I think 400,000 is totally acceptable. So I'm going to keep that. And then I'm going to do a labs auto UV. I tend to use this auto UV now all the time for UVing on these kind of random shapes. And it takes a little while, but I'm not too concerned. I do it once, I get some fairly decent UVs, and then I can just leave it at that. All right, so that did take quite a while, and the UVs aren't amazing, but they're pretty good. You can see like the main chocolate bar here, it has a pretty good mesh, although I think that's actually the bottom, yeah. And these are all broken up, but when you put like noises and stuff, you don't really notice it. And it's nice just to have some UVs. And so what I'm going to do now is just do another file cache. And this is going to be kind of like the low res version. So this is chocolate bar VDB. This will be chocolate bar reduced, and save that. And then what I can do is I can do a labs UV transfer. So if I want to use this mesh, I can just use it with the right UVs. This isn't super fast either, but it's fast enough that I don't have to worry too much, and I won't file cache this one. It can take a few seconds if I need to open the file. So I'm going to save this, and this is now the chocolate bar that is ready to rumble, and I can render either of these. So let's talk about the materials and stuff. So what I'll do is I'll just drop down a null and pop this in here, and I'm going to just use a transform node. And let's jump out. Let's show me the floor, and what I want to do is just kind of create a camera that's kind of looking down this angle. So let's just create a camera here, and that looks good. I will leave everything at default and then just transform my actual chocolate bar to get into this space. And I found this angle is a little bit easier to light with dome lights and with just general lighting, so I'll just do something like this. I think that's pretty good. Now, something to be aware that a very flat bar like this is quite hard to light because there's very little for the light to reflect on and there's not many details. So I'm not expecting this to particularly look amazing, but it's a good place to start. So render chocolate, as always, red. I'll copy this, I'll paste it here, turn that off, turn this on. All right, so we need a light. So let's just start off with a dome light. And because this is kind of like a studio thing, let's just go with a studio. And I might change, but for now, I'll just do that. And I'll leave that. And then let's set our check marks 1. And I'm hitting Control to do this, and then 3 on out. And here, I'm going to create an RS material builder. I'll call this chocolate bar. I can apply that. And for now, we'll leave it. And let's also create our background. And I'll use my preset. And if you haven't seen it, this is just a grid with a bend with some UVs, but I don't even need UVs. I'm just going to scale it, rotate it, and drop it down. Cool. And that'll just give me some nice global illumination on the floor. So now I can split top and bottom. And let's open the render view. All right, so that looks exactly like a chocolate bar. So let's just increase this, take away the saturation, and let's just double check that I'm getting. Okay, so I want this to be fairly bright. This is not the lighting I'm going to end up with, but this is just kind of for look dev. So I want to be able to actually see what's going on. So if I jump in here, let's just create a background material so you can see that applies itself, and let's just turn off that and just make it kind of a neutral gray. And then we can focus on the chocolate bar. So obviously chocolate is generally like a reddish orange, just like that, as you can see. So it's maybe something like this is kind of chocolatey, and this lighting isn't good enough. I'm sorry. I'm going to drop down a RS light. Sometimes I think, oh, I'll just keep it, but then it just looks too bad, and I can't do it. And this chocolate bar is pretty massive at the moment, so I might need to shrink it down. I mean, who's ever heard of a 5-meter chocolate? But we'll go with it. I'm fine with that. Let's just keep that. Let's just turn off this light. And see, this is facing the wrong way. What is going on? Alrighty, that looks beautiful. Okay, so I think maybe that's better. I don't know, maybe not. But now I feel like I can get a slightly nicer chocolate texture. Maybe that's a little bit too red. All right, so that's starting to feel like a chocolate bar, but one of the things I need here is I need some subsurface scattering. So what I'm going to do is just drop down a color ABS, and this way I can kind of steal this color, copy parameter, paste it in here, paste values. I don't want an alpha channel. And then I can use this to drive multiple. So I can set that in the base color. And I can also set it in the MS color, which is what I'm going to use for my subsurface. So if I turn this up, you can see this looks like it's calculating G out, but it's actually not. That's just the subsurface going crazy. And I like to turn this down like just a little bit so that it's not all the way up, just so that you get some of that base color through. And then this needs to be quite low. And the other thing I want to do is just create a second camera, and just so I can get a little bit closer to the bar, let's just make this one 120. And let's jump into camera 2, just so we can kind of see a little bit more. It's especially hard when I'm recording because I can't make the render view really big on my other monitor, which many people had a conversation about my monitor setup. I'm going to have neck problems, and I can actually feel my neck is twisted to the side, so I do need to maybe revisit that. But for now, I will keep it. So you can kind of see that the subsurface, if I turn subsurface off, you don't really go through here, but as you turn this up and pull it back, this amount here is kind of like how deep it would go. And sometimes I would turn this up more and you would get that really nice kind of edge breakup. You can see it here. But when I was looking at the chocolate bar itself, I saw that it didn't actually have that much subsurface. So instead of just using a solid color, what I noticed, if you take a look at this photo here, you can see that there's like little specks of different colors inside of this chocolate. And so I used the max on noise. Remember, I have UVs, so I can use noises and stuff quite easily. And I ended up using something like the piezo noise, but you get these like little specks, which is what I wanted. But they need to be super tiny. So we'll set it to object and make this super tiny. And then just drive that into a color layer. And I can use this color again. This is why I like to have this. I'm going to take both of these and pop them into there, and then pop this into the base color, this into the mask, and then I have full control over this here. And you can see now, it's still hard to see, you can see how it's adding all these little specks here, and that's this color here. So if I make it blue, you'll see how big of a difference that makes. So this is actually, let's just do a ramp so I can invert these colors and clamp them if I need to. So now this color can be like a very dark version. Oops. Let's just check what's going on here. Let's just push this a bit. I am at 400%, so it's probably a little bit too intense. Let's just take camera 2 and push it really close. Okay, so you can start to see that this just adds a little bit, and maybe this can be a little bit bigger. You can see, and I actually want to invert this. I just want the specks to be dark, but the rest of the color to be what I set up here. So now we get all this, and this is too big, so maybe half of that, 1.5. And it's very subtle, but I found that these little kind of subtle things, when you start adding them up, they make quite a big difference. So I just try to add them and layer them in as I could. So the next thing I wanted to do was kind of break up some of these reflections. And these kind of very highlighty reflections look really cool on liquid, but on this actual chocolate bar, I found they didn't look so good. You can see this needs to be a little darker. So the one that I ended up using was, if I go into this David Gruer pack, or D Gruer, I think it's David. I use this one a lot, this finger smudges. I'll have a look at this. I can use this Luke Van ABS. I set it to Control Alt Shift and A, and then I can kind of set it up. Let me refresh here. So you just kind of get these big swirly things, and if I add a ramp in here, I can pop this into the reflection roughness. And we can then just ramp these colors. So maybe this is like a little bit brighter, and then this one can be pushed in. So you can see this section here, how it's breaking up a little bit, and here. So it just adds a little bit more imperfections. Not a lot, but a little bit. And then I can do the same thing here with a bump map. And this just lets me, you can see here how it like actually makes this bumpy, but I need it to be really subtle. And it makes a big difference, so I can even push it lower. And it just peaks these out, and you start to get a little bit more realism in this. So if we jump at camera 1, you start to see that this feels a little bit more chocolatey with a little bit of imperfections and stuff. And if we go into camera 2 and we just pull out a little bit, so we see a little bit more, but not too much, you can start to see that this feels quite nice. Maybe this one doesn't need to be as clamped. And I think this one's a little bit more red than I ended up using. And there we go, now it's a little bit more brown, and maybe this one can be a bit more brown too. Chocolate is a hard one because depending on what reference you look, it can be quite red and it can be quite, or it can be quite brown. It really depends on how it's rendered. I went for something a little bit more browny. And that was pretty much how I got to the chocolate bar. This is the textures, and yeah, I played with the subsurface. So when we get into actually fracturing it and turning it into multiple pieces, and when the pieces get thinner, then the subsurface plays quite a big role into how like this looks. But in general, this is where I started, and this is the exact same thing I started with when I started the project, and then I started playing with different simulations and stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you soon where we start to fracture it and do some other fun things with it. I'll see you then.